when my only son, the one I'd raised and sacrificed everything for, stood in front of everyone and pointed at his mother-in-law, declaring, "Now I have a real mother. I didn't just lose a child, I lost my dignity, my self-respect, and 30 years of building a future together. But if he thought he could cut me out of his life while still benefiting from my hard work, well, he was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget." My name is Margaret Hollister, though everyone calls me Maggie. At 72, I've built more than just a business. I've built a legacy, but legacies, I've learned, mean nothing to those who never understood the sacrifice behind them. I still remember the summer of 1978 when Samuel and I opened our first store, just a tiny corner shop on Maple Street, barely 500 square feet, with hand-painted signs and produce we'd driven 3 hours to buy from local farms. Sam would wake at 4:30 a.m. every morning, loading our old Ford pickup while I prepared the cash register and arranged displays. We'd work until 9 p.m., sometimes later during harvest season, our hands stained with soil and fruit juice, dreaming of something bigger. One day, "Mags," Sam would say, wiping sweat from his forehead with that red bandana he always carried, "we'll have stores all across Colorado, fresh food for families who care about quality." His eyes would light up when he talked about it, the same way they lit up when he looked at our son David, then just a baby sleeping in a makeshift crib behind the counter. We named it Hollister Fresh because Sam insisted our name meant something. "When people see Hollister," he'd say, "they'll know it's family-owned, family-proud." By the time David turned 10, we had 6 stores. By his 11th birthday, we had 12. Then came that October morning in 2002. Sam had left at 5 a.m. for the Denver wholesale market. The state trooper arrived at 7:15 a.m. A semi-truck had jackknifed on I-70. Black ice. Sam never had a chance. I remember standing in our kitchen, David clinging to my nightgown, both of us trying to comprehend a world without Samuel Hollister's booming laugh, without his dreams, without his stubborn optimism that hard work and honest dealings would always win out. The business cards on the counter still read, "Samuel and Margaret Hollister, proprietors." I threw them all away that night. For months, suppliers, competitors, even our own managers assumed I'd sell. A widow with a young son couldn't possibly manage 12 stores. They whispered, but they didn't know Margaret Hollister. They didn't know that I'd learned every aspect of the business alongside Sam, that I knew our profit margins better than he did, that I'd been the one to negotiate the lease agreements while he charmed the farmers. David became my world, my purpose, my reason to keep those stores running. Every decision I made for him when he needed braces. I expanded to a 13th location when he wanted to attend hockey camp. I launched our organic line. When he got accepted to Columbia for his MBA, I took out loans against the stores to ensure he'd graduate debt-free. "You spoil him," my sister Helen would warn during her visits from Phoenix. "Boys need to struggle a little, learn the value of things." But how could I explain that David's success was my success? That seeing him in those sharp suits, hearing him talk about international business strategies, watching him move through the world with confidence, that was my reward for all those 4:30 a.m. mornings and 9 p.m. nights. He was going to have everything Sam and I had dreamed of, and more. I should have paid attention to the signs, should have noticed how he stopped coming home for Thanksgiving, how his calls grew shorter and less frequent, should have realized that my son, raised in the aisles of Hollister Fresh, playing between boxes of apples and bundles of carrots, had grown ashamed of his roots. But mother's love is blind, and I wore my blindness like a badge of honor. The first crack in our foundation appeared during David's junior year at Columbia. He'd stopped coming home for breaks. Claiming internships and study groups kept him too busy. When he finally visited that Christmas, he seemed different. His mountain accent smoothed away, his clothes bearing labels I couldn't pronounce, his eyes sliding past our family photos like they were strangers. "The stores are doing well," I told him over dinner, eager to share our success. We're thinking of expanding into organic dairy. Mom, he sighed, pushing his pot roast around his plate, the same pot roast he used to beg for every Sunday. Nobody says organic anymore. It's locally sourced or farm to table. You need to modernize your branding. That stung, but I smiled. Well, maybe you can help us with that when you graduate. The look he gave me, part pity, part embarrassment, should have been my warning. I'm interviewing with Goldman Sachs, Mom, investment banking, real business. Real business, as if 25 years of feeding communities wasn't real. Spring of his senior year, he called at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Mom, I want you to meet someone. Her name's Vanessa Harding. Harding, even in our small Colorado town, that name carried weight. Marcus Harding had built half the luxury developments from Aspen to Telluride. His wife Eleanor sat on every charity board that mattered, her picture regularly gracing the society pages I'd never had time to read. They visited in May. Vanessa was everything I wasn't, tall, elegant, with honey blonde hair, and a way of holding her wine glass that made my kitchen look shabby. She smiled when David introduced us, but her eyes cataloged everything: the dated cabinets, my work-worn hands, the Hollister fresh apron still hanging by the door. How charming, she said when David showed her the photo of our first store. It's like something from a movie about the old days. Eleanor Harding was worse. She arrived for dinner in a Mercedes that cost more than my house, her lips pursing when she saw our street. Margaret, she said, extending a manicured hand like she was doing me a favor. David's told us so much about your little shops. Little shops, 12 locations, $8 million in annual revenue, 300 employees, little shops. The dinner was torture. Eleanor dominated conversation with stories about their recent trip to Martha's Vineyard, their renovation of a historic mansion, Vanessa's acceptance to Wharton for her MBA. Every anecdote was a reminder of the gulf between our worlds. You must be so proud of David, Eleanor said over dessert, rising above his circumstances like this. I've always been proud of him, I replied carefully, and of the life his father and I built. She laughed, a tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. Of course, but it must be such a relief to see him moving into more sophisticated circles. David said nothing, just sat there, holding Vanessa's hand, letting his future mother-in-law diminish everything I'd given him. After they left, I found myself in the garage, staring at Sam's old tool bench. She's wrong, I whispered to his memory. What we built matters. But David was already slipping away. His calls became updates about Vanessa's family, their connections, their world. He spent holidays with the Hardings now, sending apologetic texts about obligations and networking opportunities. When he did visit, he'd mention casually how the Hardings were advising him on investments, how Marcus was mentoring him, how Eleanor had introduced him to important people. That woman is poisoning him against you, Helen said during one of our phone calls. He's in love, I defended, though the words tasted bitter. It's natural to want to impress her family. Is it natural to forget where he came from? To act like his own mother embarrasses him? I hung up on her that night, but lying in bed at 2:30 a.m., staring at the ceiling, I knew she was right. My son, the boy who'd helped me stock shelves, who'd worn his Hollister fresh t-shirt with pride, who'd promised to make his daddy proud, was disappearing into a world that saw me as an inconvenience, a reminder of origins better forgotten. The wedding planning began in September. Or rather, I learned about the wedding planning in September, 3 months after David had proposed and the Hardings had already booked the Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. We wanted to surprise you, David said when I asked why I hadn't been consulted. Eleanor has connections there. She got us the presidential suite for the reception. That's wonderful, I managed. When were you thinking we'd sit down to discuss the details? Oh, Eleanor's handling everything. She has this incredible wedding planner from New York. Don't worry about a thing. Mom, don't worry about a thing. My only child's wedding, and I wasn't to worry about a thing. The first bill arrived in October. $40,000 for my contribution to the flowers and catering. The note from Eleanor's assistant was polite but firm. As discussed with David, the bride's and groom's families traditionally split certain costs. Your portion is enclosed. $40,000. As discussed with David, I called him immediately. It's just how things are done in their circles, he explained, sounding irritated at the interruption. You don't want people talking, do you? Saying we couldn't afford our share? David, $40,000 is... Mom, please. I know the stores are doing well. This is important to me. To us. I paid it. Of course I paid it. What mother wouldn't? But that was just the beginning. There was no mother-son dance selection. Eleanor had decided on the order of events. No input on the menu. The Harding family chef was handling it. No say in the guest list, though I was graciously allowed to invite 30 people to a wedding of 400. 30? I asked David during one of his rare visits home. Space is limited, he said, not meeting my eyes. The Hardings have a lot of business obligations. I submitted my list. Our store managers, the farmers who'd supplied us for decades, friends who'd known David since he was in diapers. It came back with red lines through half the names. The Johnsons? I asked, incredulous. Mary Johnson taught you to ride a bike. Vanessa doesn't know them. David shrugged. It would be awkward. The invitation arrived in December. Mrs. Margaret Hollister, it read, is invited to attend the wedding of Vanessa Eleanor Harding to Mr. David Hollister. No mention that I was the mother of the groom, just another name on a list. The wedding day dawned crystal clear, one of those perfect June Saturdays that Colorado delivers like a gift. I wore the dress I'd bought. The third one, after Eleanor had subtly indicated the first two were not quite right for the venue. Navy blue, conservative, expensive enough to hurt. I drove myself to the Broadmoor, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. In the parking lot, I watched limousines deliver the Harding family, their friends, their world. I walked in alone. The ceremony was beautiful, I suppose. Vanessa looked like a magazine cover. David stood straight and proud, his eyes never finding mine in the crowd. When the officiant asked who gave this woman to be married, Marcus Harding's voice boomed. When it came time for family photos, Eleanor directed the photographer with military precision. Now just the immediate families, she announced, and somehow I found myself shuffled to the side. Oh, Margaret, she said, as if just noticing me. We'll do extended family later. Extended family? I bit my tongue until it bled. The reception was when it happened. Eleanor had been holding court at the head table. Champagne flowing, stories flowing faster. The band had just finished their second set when David stood, swaying slightly, his bow tie askew. I want to make a toast, he announced, grabbing the microphone, to the most amazing woman in my life. My heart lifted for just a moment. I, Eleanor Harding, he continued, wrapping an arm around his mother-in-law. This incredible woman has shown me what grace really means, what class really is, what a real mother does for her children. The room murmured appreciatively. Eleanor beamed. Vanessa smiled, and then David, my David, delivered the words that would shatter 30 years of devotion. For the first time in my life, he said, raising his glass, his voice carrying across the ballroom, I finally have a real mother. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, then the applause began. Scattered and uncertain, Eleanor's smile was triumphant. A few people glanced my way with pity or shock. Most didn't even know who I was. I stood quietly, carefully, placed my napkin on the table with steady hands, and walked out of my son's wedding with my head high and my heart in pieces, while behind me. David laughed and called for another round of champagne. In the parking lot, I sat in my car until the tears stopped. Then I drove home, called Harold Grant, my lawyer, and said 5 words that would change everything. I need you here tomorrow. Harold Grant arrived at my house at 8 a.m. sharp on Sunday morning, his silver hair neat despite the early hour, his briefcase heavy with possibilities. We'd worked together for 20 years. He'd handled Sam's estate, the business expansion, every major decision. He took one look at my face and asked no questions about why I'd summoned him. "Tell me what you need, Maggie." I poured coffee with steady hands. "I want David removed from the board of directors. I want his voting shares converted to non-voting shares. And I want to buy back every piece of equity I've given him over the years." Harold set down his cup carefully. "That's significant. David owns 15% of Hollister Fresh. As a board member, he has—" "I know what he has," I interrupted. "I gave it to him. Every birthday since he turned 18. I gifted him shares. Christmas bonuses went into his trust. I wanted him to have security, a foundation." I laughed, bitter as burnt coffee. "I built him a castle, and he used it to look down on me." "The board removal is straightforward," Harold said, pulling out his legal pad. "He's missed the last 11 meetings. We have documentation. The share conversion is trickier. But there's a clause about fiduciary responsibility. If we can show he's neglected his duties—" "He hasn't visited a single store in 3 years," I said. "Hasn't reviewed a financial report. Doesn't know we've expanded into prepared meals or that we're testing home delivery. He collected his dividend checks and nothing more." Harold nodded, writing rapidly. "And the buyback?" "Market rate, every penny it's worth. I want the paperwork so clean it squeaks." "Maggie, this will cost you nearly $2 million. "Then I'll pay $2 million. I met his eyes. "But there's more." I outlined the rest. A new will leaving everything to Claire Morrison, my assistant manager who'd worked beside me for 15 years, and to an employee trust fund. The house Sam built would go to Habitat for Humanity. The small foundation I'd started in Sam's name would receive the rest. "Not a dime to David?" Harold asked quietly. "He has a new family now, one with real mothers and real money. Let them provide for him." We worked until noon, Harold's assistant arriving with her laptop to draft documents. By 2 p.m., I'd signed papers that would unravel 30 years of careful planning, every signature a small death. "When do we notify him?" Harold asked. "Tomorrow, after the honeymoon flight leaves. I want him to land in Bora Bora and find the emails waiting." That evening, I walked through each of our stores. In the original location on Maple Street, I found Miguel stocking peaches. He'd started as a bag boy 20 years ago, now managed 3 locations. "Mrs. H," he grinned, "what brings you out on a Sunday?" "Just checking on my investments," I said, and meant it. These people. Miguel, Claire, the night cleaners, the early morning bakers. They were my real legacy, not the boy who'd stood in a $5,000 tuxedo and disowned me for applause. Monday came like a reckoning. At 10:15 a.m., as David's plane lifted off for French Polynesia, Harold's office sent the first email, notice of board removal. By 10:30 a.m., the share conversion documentation. By 11 a.m., the buyback offer. My phone rang at 2 p.m. "Eleanor." "What have you done?" she hissed without preamble. "I've protected my business," I replied calmly. "Something you should understand. David is your son." "No," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. "David made it very clear at the wedding. He's your son now. Congratulations on the acquisition." "You vindictive witch. When he gets back?" "When he gets back, he'll find his shares are worth exactly what the market says they're worth. Nothing more, nothing less. He'll find his board seat filled by someone who actually attends meetings. He'll find that choices have consequences." "We'll sue." "Please do. Harold Grant would love the billable hours. And I'd love to see discovery documents showing how many board meetings David missed while playing golf at your country club." She hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Marcus this time. Then Vanessa's brother, then numbers I didn't recognize, all leaving increasingly threatening voicemails. I turned off the phone and went back to work. That night, Claire found me in the office, surrounded by expansion plans for the Denver market. "Heard some rumors," she said carefully. "All true," I confirmed. "We're restructuring. You'll be taking David's board seat. The employee trust will receive significant shares annually. We're going to build something that lasts. Claire, something that values the people who show up." She sat down hard. "Maggie, I don't know what to say." Say you'll help me make Hollister Fresh what it was always meant to be, a family business, just not the family I'd originally planned. David's lawyers arrived like a storm front on Thursday, 3 of them, all sharp suits and sharper tongues, from Denver's most expensive firm. Harold met them with his usual calm and a thicker file than theirs. This is clearly retaliatory. The lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Stern, declared, "Mrs. Hollister is attempting to punish her son for a perceived social slight. My client is exercising her rights as majority shareholder," Harold responded smoothly. Rights clearly outlined in the corporate bylaws that Mr. David Hollister signed when he accepted his board position, which he accepted as a family member, not anticipating his mother would weaponize. "I have here," and Harold interrupted, producing a bound document. "Records of every board meeting for the past 3 years. Mr. Hollister attended exactly one, the Christmas party, where he left after 20 minutes. The room fell silent except for the rustle of pages. "Furthermore," Harold continued, "we have emails where Mr. Hollister explicitly stated the business was outdated, embarrassing, and, my personal favorite, a relic of strip mall America." Hardly the words of an engaged board member. Patricia's jaw tightened. Personal opinions expressed in private? To potential investors, while identifying himself as a board member of Hollister Fresh, we have sworn affidavits. I watched this unfold from behind my desk. Silent as Sam had taught me. "Let the lawyers lawyer," he used to say. "Your job is to look like you've already won." The meeting lasted 3 hours. They threatened lawsuits, media exposure, family court. Harold countered with documentation, precedent, and the kind of measured responses that cost $800 an hour. When they finally left, Patricia turned at the door. "This won't end here. Mrs. Hollister." "I'm counting on it," I replied. The news spread through our small business community like wildfire. By Friday afternoon, I was fielding calls from suppliers, competitors, local media. The story was too juicy to ignore. Local business matriarch disowns son after wedding humiliation. Eleanor escalated things on Saturday. The Harding family PR machine went into overdrive, painting me as a vindictive mother who couldn't accept her son's social advancement. The Denver Post ran a piece titled "Family Feud When Success Divides Generations." They quoted sources close to the family extensively. Every source sounded remarkably like Eleanor. But I'd been preparing for this too. Claire and I had compiled testimonials from employees whose kids I'd helped through college, from suppliers I'd supported during tough seasons, from customers who'd relied on us for 25 years. When Channel 9 called for my response, I was ready. I've spent 30 years building a business that values loyalty, hard work, and community. I told the reporter, I expect the same values from everyone involved with Hollister Fresh, family or not. But surely you can understand why people see this as harsh. Your own son? My son made his choice. He chose to align himself with people who see our business, our employees and our customers, as embarrassments. That's his right, just as it's my right to protect what my late husband and I built from anyone who would diminish it. The interview aired Monday night. By Tuesday morning, something unexpected happened. Support started pouring in, emails from other family business owners who'd faced similar situations, letters from employees thanking me for standing up for them, even a few customers who shared their own stories of ungrateful children. But the legal battle intensified. David, back from his honeymoon and furious, hired 2 more law firms. They filed injunctions, demanded accounting audits, claimed elder abuse. That last one almost made me laugh. Elder abuse because I wouldn't subsidize his new lifestyle. Eleanor tried a different approach the following week. She showed up at my house at 7 p.m. alone, wearing what I'm sure she considered humble clothing, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that cost more than most people's rent. "Margaret," she began, settling uninvited into Sam's old chair, "we're both mothers. Surely we can resolve this between us." "Are we both mothers?" I asked. "Because last I heard, You were the only real mother in David's life. Her composure cracked slightly. He was drunk. It was a foolish toast. You're really going to destroy your relationship over words? Words have meaning, Eleanor. You should know that. You've been using them to undermine me since the day we met. I've tried to help him evolve. You've tried to erase where he came from. There's a difference. She leaned forward, dropping her voice. What will it take? An apology. David will apologize. Will he mean it? Does it matter? And there it was, the fundamental difference between us. To Eleanor, appearances were everything, smooth over the surface, and the problem disappeared. But I'd learned from Sam that foundations matter. What's underneath always shows eventually. Yes, I said quietly. It matters. It's the only thing that matters. She left without another word, but not before trying one last manipulation. You'll die alone. No grandchildren. No family. Just your little stores and your pride. I thought of Claire, of Miguel, of the 300 people who showed up every day to build something real. I've got all the family I need. The Harding empire began crumbling in March. 9 months after the wedding, I heard the first whispers from our banking contacts. Marcus had over-leveraged on a massive development in Vail, betting everything on luxury condos just as the market shifted towards sustainable housing. By April, the dominoes were falling. The Vail project stalled. 2 other developments faced cost overruns. Then the news broke that Marcus had been borrowing against future projects to fund current ones. A house of cards built on mountain air and ambition. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Claire knocked. "You need to see this," she said, handing me her phone. The Denver Business Journal headline read, "Harding Development lays off 30% of workforce." David's name appeared in paragraph 3, Senior Vice President of Acquisitions, a title Marcus had created for him, was among the eliminated positions. "How long until he calls?" Claire asked. "He won't," I said. "He'll have Eleanor do it." I was wrong. Vanessa called first, 3 days later, at 11:30 p.m. "Mrs. Hollister?" Her voice had lost its polished edge. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "What do you want, Vanessa?" A pause. "David doesn't know I'm calling. He's having a difficult time. I imagine unemployment is challenging for someone accustomed to titles without responsibilities." "That's not—" She stopped, regrouped. "The family finances are complicated right now. David's been trying to find another position. But without his shares in Hollister Fresh on his resume, banks won't even look at him. Those shares were liquidated at full market value. He received every penny they were worth." "Which went to lawyers," she said bitterly, "fighting you." The irony was delicious. They'd spent nearly $1 million trying to force me to give them money I'd already offered to pay. Now they needed that $1 million. "Is there a point to this call, Vanessa?" "David needs work. Real work. I thought maybe—" "No." "You haven't heard what I'm asking." "Yes, I have. The answer is no." She hung up, but I knew this was just the opening move. By May, the Harding situation had worsened. The business media covered it with the kind of glee reserved for fallen giants. Marcus's investors were suing. Properties were being foreclosed. The Broadmoor estate, Eleanor's pride, was quietly listed for sale. David finally called on a Tuesday evening in early June, almost exactly a year after his wedding. I was in the greenhouse behind Store 7, checking on our new herb program, when my phone rang. "Mom?" His voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "David, I need to talk to you." "So talk." "Not like this. Can I come see you?" I considered this while watching Maria teach a customer about basil varieties. "I'll be at the Maple Street store tomorrow at 6 a.m. You can meet me there." He arrived at 6:20 a.m., driving a Honda instead of his BMW. His suit was the same one from his wedding, now loose on his frame. The confidence I'd watched grow into arrogance had evaporated, leaving someone I almost didn't recognize. "Mom," he started, then stopped. We stood in the produce section, surrounded by the morning's delivery. "You look thin," I observed. Vanessa left, he blurted. Filed for divorce last month. Moved back to her parents' house in Scottsdale. I continued checking the peach delivery, noting bruises, testing firmness. I see. Everything's gone. The job, the house, the cars, they took it all back. They? The Hardings. Everything was in the family trust. When I stopped being useful, he trailed off. So you've come home. I've come to ask for a job, he said quietly. Any job. I'll stock shelves, work the register, whatever you need. I set down the peach I was holding and looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in years. Why should I hire you? Because I know the business? Do you? When's peak season for Colorado corn? What's our margin on organic dairy? Name 3 of our suppliers. His silence stretched between us like a year of missed meetings. I can learn, he said finally. From whom? The employees you were embarrassed by? The managers whose calls you never returned? Mom, please, I made mistakes. No, David, you made choices. You chose the Hardings. You chose their world. You chose to stand in front of 400 people and declare Eleanor your real mother. His face crumbled. I was drunk. You were honest. For the first time in years. You were completely honest about how you saw me, how you saw all of this. I gestured at the store around us. An embarrassment, a relic, something to escape. I need this job, he whispered. I have nothing. You have exactly what you valued, I replied. Nothing. We stood there in the morning light filtering through the store windows, between the tomatoes and the strawberries, father and son reduced to a transaction. I could see Sam in David's jawline, in the way his hands clenched when he was desperate. But Sam would never have stood where David stood now. I'll make you an offer, I said finally, one time, non-negotiable. Hope flickered in his eyes. Anything? $5,000, cash, enough for a security deposit, first month's rent and groceries while you look for work, elsewhere. That's all. That's more than you offered me when you walked out of my life for people with deeper pockets. But I'm your son. My son died at his wedding. I cut him off. When he pointed to another woman and called her his real mother, you're a stranger who happens to look like him. David's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, desperation, and finally, something like understanding. You're really going to let me twist in the wind. I'm giving you the same consideration you gave me, the same loyalty, the same respect. This is revenge. This is reciprocity. I pulled out my checkbook, wrote the check with steady hands. Take it or leave it, but know this. It's the last thing you'll ever receive from me or Hollister Fresh. He stared at the check like it might bite him. What am I supposed to do? What I did when your father died, what I did when you abandoned me, figure it out. The Hardings said you were cold, he said bitterly, that underneath the small-town act, you were calculating. Guess they were right. The Hardings said a lot of things. How much of it helped you when you needed them? That landed, his shoulders sagged in defeat. He took the check, folded it carefully. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Are you? Or are you just sorry it didn't work out? He couldn't answer that. Maybe he didn't know himself. As he turned to leave, I called out one last time, David. He stopped but didn't turn around. Your father would have given you anything. The stores, the house, his last dollar. That's the difference between us. He loved blindly. I learned to love with my eyes open. He walked out then, past the registers where he'd played as a child, past the bulletin board with employee birthdays he'd never bothered to learn, past the photo of our grand opening he'd once been so proud of. I watched him get into his Honda and drive away, knowing it was the last time I'd see my son. Eleanor called that afternoon, fury crackling through the phone. $5,000? You gave him $5,000? Which is $5,000 more than you're giving him, from what I hear. He's your child. He's your son, remember? Your real son. I'm just honoring the family structure you worked so hard to create. You vindictive... Careful, Eleanor, you're broke now. You can't afford the kind of lawyers who make problems disappear. This isn't over, she hissed. When we recover. You won't, I interrupted. Marcus built on sand and ego. You cultivated relationships based on bank balances. David abandoned the one person who loved him unconditionally. None of you understood that real foundations take decades to build and seconds to destroy. He could have been something, she said, her voice breaking slightly, with our connections, our influence. He was something. He was my son. That wasn't enough for any of you. I hung up on Eleanor Harding for the last time and went back to work. There were orders to review, employees to check on, customers to serve, real things, lasting things. That evening, Claire found me in the office, staring at an old photo of David on Sam's shoulders, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I gave him $5,000, I said. Sam would have given him everything. Sam never saw him choose someone else, Claire replied. Sam never heard him deny his own mother for applause. I put the photo in my desk drawer, face down, set up a meeting with the Denver expansion team for Monday, and let's increase the employee bonus pool by 15% this quarter. Maggie, I have a business to run. Claire, a family to take care of, just not the family I'd planned. She squeezed my shoulder and left me alone with my thoughts and the quiet hum of success that David had been too proud to hear. 6 months later, I stood in my new Denver office, 20 floors up, watching the sun set over the mountains. The expansion had exceeded every projection. 15 new stores across the Front Range, each one a testament to what we'd built without the dead weight of those who'd never believed in us. The phone on my desk buzzed. Claire's voice came through. Maggie, that reporter from the Wall Street Journal is here. Send her in. The article would run next week. The matriarch of Middle America, how Maggie Hollister built an empire on values. They'd photograph me in the Maple Street store, not this executive suite. That's where the real story lived. My lawyer Harold had called that morning with news. The Harding bankruptcy was final. Marcus was working as a consultant for one of his former competitors. Eleanor had moved to a one-bedroom condo in Aurora. And David was working at a car dealership in Fort Collins, living in a studio apartment, rebuilding from nothing. Do you want me to keep tracking him? Harold had asked. No, I'd said. He's got his life. I've got mine. Now, as the city lights began to twinkle below, I thought about Sam, about how he dreamed of stores across Colorado, fresh food for families, a legacy of hard work and honest dealing. He'd gotten all of that, just not the way we'd imagined. The office door opened. Miguel entered with a grin, wearing the executive vice president badge I'd pinned on him that morning. Mrs. H. The quarterly numbers are in. We broke 8 figures, $10 million in revenue this quarter alone. And the employee bonuses? Distributed this afternoon, Maria in produce cried, good tears, he added quickly. I smiled. Sam always said tears in the produce section meant we were doing something right. The team wants to celebrate dinner at that new place downtown? Tell them I'll meet them there in an hour. I have one more thing to do. Alone again, I pulled out the photo I'd kept face down for 6 months. David on Sam's shoulders, both of them laughing. I looked at it for a long moment, then placed it in the charity box by the door. Someone else might want a nice frame. The elevator ride down felt like descending through years of struggle, triumph, betrayal, and ultimately clarity. In the lobby, I passed a young woman studying a Hollister fresh job application. Good company, she asked, nervous. The best, I said, if you're willing to work for it. Outside, the Denver evening wrapped around me like a promise. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new stores to open, new lives to impact. But tonight, I'd celebrate with my real family, the ones who'd stood by me, who'd believed in the dream, who understood that success wasn't about escaping where you came from, but honoring it. I thought about David one last time as I walked to my car. He'd learned, perhaps too late, that when you trade authentic love for synthetic acceptance, you end up with neither. The Hardings had welcomed him as a useful acquisition. When his usefulness expired, so did their affection. Now he was learning what I'd known all along. Real foundations aren't built on pretense or connections or the approval of those who look down on your origins. They're built on showing up at 4:30 a.m. to unload trucks, on knowing your employees' children's names, on keeping your word even when it costs you, on choosing substance over style, every single time. The parking garage echoed with my footsteps, solitary but not lonely. I had 300 employees who trusted me, suppliers who'd become friends, customers who'd watched David grow up and understood why I'd had to let him go. I had Claire, who'd become the daughter I'd never had. I had Miguel and Maria and all the others who proved daily that family isn't just about blood. I'd lost a son but gained clarity, lost an heir but discovered my true legacy wasn't meant to be inherited. It was meant to be earned. As I drove toward dinner with my team, I allowed myself one moment of maternal grief somewhere in Fort Collins. My boy was learning the lessons I couldn't teach him when he was surrounded by comfort. Maybe he'd build something real from the ashes of his choices. Maybe he wouldn't. Either way, it was his journey now. Mine led forward, toward the lights of downtown Denver where my real family waited, where tomorrow beckoned with new possibilities, where Samuel Hollister's dream lived on in ways he'd never imagined but would have absolutely understood. The rearview mirror showed the Hollister Fresh logo glowing against the darkening sky. In the end, that's what remained. Not the boy who'd chosen flashover substance. Not the family who'd tried to diminish us. Not the lawyers or the drama or the pain. Just the work, the values, the people who mattered. And that, I knew as I pulled into the restaurant parking lot to the sound of my employees' laughter spilling onto the street, was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Maggie's journey. What would you have done in her situation?